if he wakes up.
Opening Kaukia, Whakataka Te Hau Ki Te Ulu, Whakataka Te Hau Ki Te Tanga, Kia ma kina Te Uta, Kia ma Tana Ki Tai, E he Ake Ana Te Akakura, He Tio He Kua, He Hahu, Ti He Mauriola. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jimmy. I have apologies from Councillor Templeton and partial absence from the Mayor. Moved by Pauline, seconded by Tim. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. I've had no declarations of interest. Confirmation of previous minutes, 7th of October. Move Sam, seconded James Daniels. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Public forum, Jane. Yes, welcome.
Thanks so much for letting me come down and talk to you. It's not a really big issue I wanted to talk to you about, but it's just about cycle safety. So I live on Francis Ave, and I bike down Madras Street in towards Waltham, and then I bike back home up Madras Street. And I'm sure you're all aware that there's been a significant number of roadworks in those streets for quite a long time. And what happens is when the road narrows to one lane, there's nowhere for the cyclists to go except for into the lane with the cars. So I'm a reasonably confident and fast-ish cyclist, but I feel quite unsafe when I have to move into the lane with the cars because the speed limit is 30 kilometres and there's no way that an average cyclist can cycle 30 kilometres. So my proposal to you is, can you lower the speed limit in those one lane areas to 20 kilometres? And I'd even give you a sort of caveat that even if you did in the winter time when you're much less visible as a cyclist, that would give me much more comfort cycling around those significant roadworks. So that's pretty much my suggestion.
Excellent. Pauline?
Thanks, Dane. Is it just the roadwork areas that we're talking about?
In this instance, I mean, yes.
So you're just wanting, normally that's 30 k's when you've got roadworks, you're wanting that to come down to
20, where there's only one lane. So if you've got nowhere else for the cyclists to go on the road, then make the roadworks 20 so that the cars at least aren't surprised when you join in with them and they have to take that into account, which they're not. I'm really conscious of the fact that the motorists aren't always expecting a cyclist to be in the lane, and so it's kind of about reducing their frustration.
Yeah, so maybe we should actually look at having a take care cyclist sign as well. Take care full cyclist, Do you find that do you use Madras Street coming out of town?
Yes.
And do you find it difficult when you're travelling north and you cross Beeley Ave and then the traffic merges there and there's parked cars? Do you find that challenging? I find that a bit challenging.
I actually find that safer since the roadworks are finished.
So you're happy with that?
The bit of Madras Street that I really struggle with is the bit round by Salisbury Street where there's no lane for the cyclists. So pretty much all the way from maybe, I don't know,
Gloucester,
north of Madrid, north of that square,
Square, Gloucester Street,
up to about Salisbury Street, you're really forced into the traffic there.
And it's quite a big camber as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Aaron.
It's pretty much exactly the same question, but I thought at roadworks that there was meant to be a traffic management plan for cyclists and pedestrians. Is it not clear when you go through?
Well, it was clear to me that my job was to merge into the traffic.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, and Pauline's right. It should be a cyclist merging sign or something, so people do it.
A lot of times they do, but there's still an issue with speed.
I mean, I don't know that they were necessarily very well signposted. I did phone and speak to the contractors, and they were very helpful at moving signs around. But it was it's the fact that you're actually forced into the lane. You have to be quite aggressive to get right into the lane, and then you're slowing the traffic down, and people further back who can't see me don't know why they're slowing down. So it's just about creating a safe speed for everybody to travel at and managing everybody's expectations.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, are we able to look at other signage beyond what they currently do, which would be more interesting, like caution cyclists merging, hitting a cyclist will see you in court with a prosecution, like stuff that's a little bit funny, but is also quite serious at the same time. So people kind of go, oh, that's right, I better not hit a cyclist.
Well, and I think
Or something like that.
Yeah.
James raised a very valid concern, and a lot of times actually where they have the placement of the signs, which are sometimes in the cycle lanes themselves. So, but yeah, I think it's something we need to follow up with. Tim, did you have a question?
I was just going to mention it. Could we get a memo from staff about the legal requirements for the traffic management and what's required? And with the sign in a traffic management, you don't really want more than 3 or 4 words, because as people go past, and it's the drivers you need to relay, not the cyclists or the pedestrians. And as they drive past, most drivers or most human beings, when they get in the car, their IQ drops. So yeah. But if we could get a memo from staff and we can look at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. We've got 2 deputations. The first deputation is from Governor's Bay School, and it's relating to item 7, the Coastal Hazards Adaptation Planning Program. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. Ko river ahau. Who here in this room actually believes climate change is real? Okay, well, for anyone who isn't 100% sure, we are here to tell you that it is real and it is happening, and why. And that there's something that we can all do about it.
Kia ora tātou, ko Kate aho. So what actually is climate change? Climate is different from weather. Climate is over a long period of time, about 30 years, compared to weather, over a short period of time, like day to day. Imagine that our Earth is being covered in a heavy duvet, keeping all the heat in, when all it really needs is a thin, airy blanket. Once the thick duvet is on, it's hard to take off. In other words, climate change is the process of the climate we're used to changing and the planet gradually heating up. This changes our weather and therefore what we and other animals experience. The cause of climate change is the enhanced greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases, especially those that are increased by human behaviour.
The greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases are natural and enable life on Earth. However, human behaviour and the Industrial Revolution has put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and the planet is warming up too much. Like Kate said, the blanket is getting too thick. Does anyone know what the 3 main human-enhanced greenhouse gases are in New Zealand? Well, they're carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide.
Some of the things we can do to reduce our impact on the greenhouse effect are talking to and educating people, planting trees, biking or walking instead of using petrol cars, and switching to renewable energy.
Morena, ko seta aho. Today I'm talking about future forecasting. Forecasting is the process of making predictions on the future based on past and present weather data, usually by analysis of trends. In any case, the data must be up to date in order for the forecast to be as accurate as possible. This video is a prediction of the weather forecast in 30 years.
Right. I've got it coming up here. But... Shall I click it again? Double click. I've got it loaded on the screen, but it's not. Yeah. It's sort of doing the loading thing for me.
Oh, let's not forget.
It's not casting. So we can skip it if you want.
The video is about the climate and the weather and how they're in 30 or 50 years, and it shows how there's been heat waves everywhere and there's been a lot of flooding and there's a lot of dengue fever going around, and it just
It's a bit depressing.
They're having lows of like low 20s, like 24 degrees is quite a cool day for them. Climate change will look and feel like this. Christchurch will get drier, Wellington will get windier, and the west coast will get wetter. This is really terrible because the west coast is already flooding, Ohinatahi Christchurch is already dry, and Wellington is already windy. So really, we need to make a change and make it now. It might seem like everything is bad. Too many trees being cut down, other animals' habitats being threatened, with some even becoming extinct, and drought in Ohinatahi happening more often. We can still make a difference. We will share some of these things later on in our presentation.
This photo shows This photo shows the predicted flooding due to sea level rise in Ototahi Christchurch. This means houses may have to be pushed back, popular tracks closed, and the port will be flooded in under 50 years if we don't act now.
Kia ora koutou, ko Bethany Aho. Does anyone know the difference between adaptation and mitigation when it comes to climate change? Well, adaptation is when you have to adjust due to the impacts of climate change, like raising the floor levels in houses by the coast so large floods won't enter them, or building seawalls or dune restoration. It can also mean not building new houses with very big risks of relocating houses away from vulnerable areas. Whereas mitigation is where you actually try to do something to reduce the impacts of climate change and how much you have to adapt, like not using fossil fuel cars, buying local, or coming to talk to your council about what they can do to slow down or even stop climate change. Tēnā koutou te whānau ko Zoe Aho. Last term, Sian and Mikey came to talk to us about climate change. Mikey told us that the sea levels will rise at least 20 to 40 centimetres. If we continue to do nothing, it could rise 70 centimetres to a metre. The past is the past. We have to think about the future. No matter what, we know there is going to be some change with our sea levels. Through our own behaviours, we can try and reduce this as much as possible, and where we can't, we have to adapt. In order to keep our Earth healthy now and for future generations, first and most importantly, we must listen to everyone. Different people will be in different situations, and share our knowledge and understanding through climate change, what needs to be done and why. Then together we can start looking at the things we could plan for and do now to adapt. Maybe we could build a seawall to keep out the water from beachfront buildings, or raise houses, move roads, or even plant vegetation. What ends up being done will depend on where we live and the best plans for us and the environment.
Kia ora, ko Millie Aho. You may be wondering why we as children and young people have been invited to talk to you today. Well, did you know that under the Children's Convention we have 42 child rights? Some of them include our right to be recognised, listened to, and taken seriously about matters that interest and affect us. And climate change both interests and affects us now and into the future.
At our school, we have already made changes. We are trying to reduce the amount of paper we use. We have surveyed the whole school about how much plastic they have in their lunch, and we started a climate change club where we teach people what climate change is and how to reduce and adapt to it. Some of us has emailed big companies about their plastic packaging, and we're suggesting that if they have to use plastic that is recycled or that can be recycled. You should think about using plastic types like that too. We are also recording and filming our very own climate change song, Fix It Up. We plan to release it early next year, so watch this space.
This all might sound a bit overwhelming, but there is hope, and together we can take action. As you are listening to our hopes and dreams for the next 5 years, feel free to write yours down.
My hope for climate change is that more kids like us will be determined to make small everyday changes, such as a meatless Monday or even just walk to school to help reduce greenhouse gases.
My hope is that we can improve our environment by reducing single-use plastics.
I hope that the layer of greenhouse gases thins as soon as possible.
Here we go. Okay. My hope is that Banks Peninsula can become predator-free.
I hope that the world will become more aware of the effects and causes of climate change.
I hope that we educate more people, especially kids, about climate change and what together we can do to stop it.
So who would like to share their hopes and dreams?
No?
Battery charged travel instead of the internal combustion engine, and that more people get on bikes and e-bikes.
I hope that people will realise that I'm already doing what Councillor Cotter said. But I also hope that my moko will live in a better world than I'm living in right now.
I just hope James stops falling off his bike.
I hope that as we go forward and have discussions about these issues, that we can hear your voice as young people very much in that conversation. So it's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for your hopes and dreams. And to conclude today, we would like to share our song, Fix It Up, that 2 of our talented students wrote about climate change. We are taking action to inform people. What will you do?
Well, cheers. Just leave them, okay.
Once upon a time, our earth was fine, and it orbited harmlessly without a crime. But millions of years ago, humans did evolve. Fast forwarding back quite a lot, we started using cars and aeroplanes, and they pump out greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. So you see, humans made this mess so we can fix it up, fix it up. So you see, humans made this mess so we can fix it up, fix it up. We want our futures, we deserve our lives, 'cause this is the planet we've got and we're destroying it. Walk to school or bike to work, plant some trees and just don't be a jerk. Oh please, help our earth. Cut down on meat, reduce plastic waste, do all these things before it's too late. Oh please, help our earth. So you see, humans make this mess so we can fix it up, fix it up. So you see, humans make this mess so we can fix it up, fix it up. We want our futures, we deserve our lives, 'cause this is the planet we've got and we're destroying it. So you see, humans made this mess so we can fix it up, oh yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?
We're a little bit over time, but if there's one question, that's fine. That was easy for you. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Next up is Helen Broughton, talking to item 8.
Thank you. Helen, I hope you've got a song as well.
I can't see your ukulele.
mind you, I could have about 3,000 people in fact, this room once people know. Yeah, it'll be packed out. Yeah. So, look, thank you for the opportunity. I've got 10 minutes, have I? Thank you. The implementation plan for the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. There's two aspects to this, and I'm not so concerned about your plan, because that's what's got to happen, but I'm concerned about the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. One aspect of it is to remove all minimum car parking requirements by August 2022, and the second aspect is building heights and densities by August 2022. So they're quite dramatic changes. There's horrendous legislation, I would call it, for Christchurch, where the district plan was done in 2016, and you've also confirmed future direction in our space. The district plan, for those who weren't here at the time, was done through a very formal process, through an independent hearings panel chaired by Judge Hanson, who's now chair of the hospital board. The panel was similar to the Environment Court, where there could be cross-examination, and it was chaired well by Judge Hanson and had outside people on the panel. Now, in terms of densities, there were two areas which won their case in front of this panel. One was the area where I live, which is the Riccarton Kilmarnock Residents Association, and the other was a large area around Condell Avenue, which I did help with their submissions. And I think the chairman, Ken Davidson, made a submission, Mike Davidson, as well as Jerry Brownlee. So it had strong opposition from local politicians. Now, these areas will be highly upset at this national policy statement once they know. And I suppose I have failed to some extent in effect, telling them at present. I've been tied up with earthquake issues. So what I wish to convey today is I've been speaking to Wellington on this. Dave Faulkner gave me a very good contact there. This is the person who drafted the legislation. He claims there is flexibility. So I've come today to say there is flexibility if a council wishes to exercise it. Now, you couldn't do it across the board, but you might have 3 or 4 areas that you want to have flexibility for, and all the council has, not all the council, but the council has then to document why they've accorded those 3 or 4 areas some discretion. There are, according to the contact in Wellington, qualifying matters and other matters in the legislation, and special character could be considered in other matters. And both areas I've spoken about would actually have that. So council can decide to exclude some areas from the strong direction from central government, and I've been told this is a council call on this, but it must be well justified and in fact recorded. I want to make you aware that there's likely to be strong concerns from the 2 residents' associations who were involved in the hearing panels in 2016 and felt that their area was going to be preserved. But it's, in terms of this legislation, it's not. The other point I've always wanted to come down and talk to you about, and I haven't, is that if you allow intensification around the cities, say in Riccarton for area where I live, then it does affect the central city development. You will get apartments and flats around Riccarton, as we have on the southern side, and it does affect your wish to improve the central city in terms of living. If I can turn to car parking, you've recently heard from myself and residents in residential medium density, which is a current zone, of the difficulties in this zone. What happens is that cars are parking on the streets, on the booms, and people have difficulty accessing their apartment. You might have to park your car and walk a block, and that's quite dangerous if you're finishing work late at night and are walking to your apartment. By taking away the requirement that councils have in their district plans to have 1 or 2 car parking spaces on site, it has the potential for other suburbs to experience the difficulties that the medium density zones in Riccarton and other areas are having. It will be across Christchurch. So if we are a garden city, the impact on us is horrendous. So I urge you to try and stop this. I do not believe it is acceptable for central government to impose a blanket order on every city in New Zealand. My understanding is that these standards did not go through an open process of select committees, etc. The Minister, long gone Phil Twyford, took the standards to Cabinet and it was signed off by Cabinet. I believe you should join with other councils to see if there's any way this can be stopped. I suggested a judicial review. Brent Antis, who I saw on the lift coming up, said it's not possible. I've talked to a family member with experience in judicial review. He actually took the council to court a long time ago and won it. I will check on that and send an email round everybody, because if you can do it, I would do it. If you can't, then I think you need to band with other councils and try and stop this through politics, through political pressure. I think the car parking is, just to do it across the whole country, is actual madness. These standards were passed on the 20th of August in an omnibus of legislation and kind of slipped through, because I was watching for it, but I even missed it. There was something else that had gone through a select committee on urban development, which was fine. And I had a person emailing me and I said, no. But it did get slipped through. So what I'm asking you to do is to be aware of flexibility for some areas for urban densities, and I'm also asking you to take strong action on car parking, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any questions? Tim.
Just call me Tim.
Yeah, no, I said Tim, and I just nodded.
It'd be really interesting to define that and how far it can go, because there's no question that national policy statements have been written in Wellington based on Auckland, so that's really affecting all of us, and none of us are happy with it. And the complaints that we get aren't specifically about intensification, they're about the quality of intensification and the amount of it. And you mentioned the parking is a really, really crucial situation for us.
Yes.
But your comment with regards from Wellington to you about flexibility,
yes,
I'd be really interested in, because when we come up to flexibility, it seems there is none from Wellington. So what you're being told and what's being directed to us and every other council around New Zealand I'd say is very, very limited, because it will end up in court.
Yes. I spoke to the person in Wellington I've had contact with, Dave Falconer, who's here today, gave me that contact. He, I think, was drafting the actual legislation. So and if you look at it carefully,
yeah, and
I won't go into that now, there is flexibility there.
Well,
it does talk about those two things, special, let's have a look.
And you are aware that we are already having intensification in character areas, so that definition of flexibility, as I go back to my first piece, is it's being written in Wellington, as you've just pointed out by your contact, based on Auckland. So Helen, it's really, really hard, but you're absolutely right, it's just not good.
Thanks. Yanni. Just quickly, thank you for raising the concerns. I was just wondering, if your community board's met with local MPs, or whether you've got a meeting coming up where you could actually raise the issue with the local members of parliament who are responsible for central government
Yes, look,
legislation.
that's sort of a good idea, and I'll be briefing the two areas that I've been sort of involved with. But certainly we can brief local MPs.
Okay.
I think I still believe, having read the legislation, which I've got here, it's hard copy for me still, there's areas where it is flexible, and I went over this with this man, in fact, Wellington. But I suspect you could only have 4 or 5
Helen, I'll stop you there because you're over time, but thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, next up we have a presentation of petition from Joe Dickinson. Welcome, Joe. Thank you. So you have 5 minutes to read the prayer and then talk to your petition.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present this petition. When collecting these signatures, Maurice Grant and I were amazed at the number of people that had contacted the City Council either via email or phone, had been put through to various departments and given job numbers with, it seems, no action taken. It would appear that the Council does not seem to know what the left hand is doing from the right. No wonder it has taken so long to get to this stage. The Council should have a record of all these interactions, as do the residents we spoke to. As stated in my submission to the Community Board in August of this year, back in May 2014, I had numerous conversations with the then City Arborist, who confidently assured me that money had been put aside in the 2015 budget for the repair, and yet here we are. There was also extensive correspondence between Mr Murray Lennox and the Council on this subject, and most certainly the Council will have a record of it. I would remind this committee that the Whanui in this Community Board at the August 7th meeting selected one of the reinstatement options presented to it by the City Arborist and recommended to the Council that this work proceed. I was therefore somewhat surprised when I read that the matter had now been put in the hands of this committee, another way of putting it in the too hard basket. Maurice Grant and I were given the impression that the residents of Clearbrook Palms do not want any of the palm trees removed, just trimmed and looked after as necessary and the planter boxes repaired. Council allows developers to do such things to make subdivisions look visually attractive, but once they, the developers, move out and there are problems that are brought to the Council's attention, we, the ratepayers, are told by them, the Council, that it is not in their scope to fix them. I digress a little here regarding the planter boxes, 3 in all in the subdivision. I have been reliably informed that the developers advised against planting these palm trees in the planter boxes above the ground, but were overruled by Council. Also, when collecting these signatures, I was told by a resident of Clearbrook Palms that a council truck had backed into the second planter box in Palm Drive opposite the reserve, thereby causing damage. The council should most definitely have a record of this. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, once again I take this opportunity to plead with this committee and council to stop duck shoving, paper shuffling, time wasting and no doubt money wasting. After all, time is money. And just get on with committing to job and expedite soonest. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Is there any questions? No. Can we get the petition? We've got the petition ready. We've got some...
We're allowed to discuss the item?
Okay, cool. Excellent. We do have a set of resolutions that we can put up.
Hi. Thanks for coming in. It's really good to have your view. The main issue is one particular tree, the one closest to Briggs Road, that's worse. Are the other ones also needing attention, or can they wait?
The two others, they're not in such bad condition, but as I say, the second planter box in Palm Drive was backed into by one of your or City Council trucks.
Allegedly.
And there's a wee bit of damage, but the main damage is in the one as you come in from Briggs Road.
Yes.
And it's been like that. I think I had complained before May 2014, and it just seems to just get... People are issued job numbers. Now, is there ever a tally taken of the job numbers and how that job number has progressed? It doesn't seem so.
No, that's interesting. I mean, one of the challenges is the method of repair and the cost to it, so we have to find a budget to do that. And it came to our community board with various options, and really it's a very, very challenging problem to solve, but I know we're going to address it today, but I'm just wondering if we should be actually looking to the future and preparing for the other two trees as well down the track. So Mike, I wonder if we should put that in as well to get the other two planter boxes assessed as well. For they'll be a few years down the track, but they'll need the same treatment.
A couple of questions from me, Joe. Like, there's a lot of signatures on this petition. What percentage of that subdivision have signed it?
Sorry?
There's a lot of signatures on your petition. What percentage of your subdivision has signed your petition? It must be pretty high.
I can't hear you properly.
So, how many people in your subdivision have signed it? Like, what percentage?
I've actually got 106 signatures, and we didn't go to all houses. Well, some of the houses people weren't there, but I actually have 106 signatures. I realise I only needed 20.
Yeah, right. What's the total amount of houses in the... Because it's quite a high percentage of your subdivision.
It would be a very... Yeah.
How old is the subdivision?
20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Approximately.
Thank you. So, Pauline, did you have an additional resolution you wanted to add?
If we should put it in as a note.
A note, yeah.
Noting there are two other planter boxes that will require similar treatment in the coming years. I don't want to make it sound like a long time. In due course, perhaps. And should we get a report on those?
Oh, we might have to pass that on to the community board. We'll deal with this one.
Okay.
Jake, you had a question? Okay.
Oh, actually, I don't know if it should go onto the community board because they're in the road. It's a transport issue. So maybe we should call for a report on them in here.
Phil?
Just asking a question of all of us. I asked staff, I suggested to staff there was a third option that I put forward, and I want to know if they have designed what I suggested into the mix.
Yeah, we don't have staff here to answer that question at the moment.
But there is a third option that I feel is a lot better, so as long we should look at that.
Sheep pilot.
It's just a question on the resolutions. When do you want that now, or? Oh yeah, cool. I was just wondering if there was a way in which we could actually just bring forward the meeting date, or if there was a way that we could actually isolate that one and get work happening on that one, and then have the wider issues come back. I'm just worried that the wider issues are going to delay actually fixing what is an urgent health and safety.
No, it's a report coming back in February on this one.
Yeah. This is not like this a December meeting, then this is the one after the December one, so it's only 2 meetings away. And obviously, when this came to the council meeting, it was very clear it wasn't going to be that straightforward to get money on budget for this thing. And this is why we're trying to look within the program what we can do to actually sort it. So this will actually generate a proper report to actually work out what we can do. Tim?
Thank you. In the report, is it possible to include one of the options as in Councillor Majors? Because, I mean, we should be looking at 3 options rather than 2, because we were actually after a good end result.
track that back into it.
So
is that possible?
2A is about the funding options which were approved by Pakikitanga Community Board. And did you want to put and investigate?
I think Tim, Phil and I have a meeting next week with the transport team, so we'll have a good discussion about it to make sure we get the best repair option that works with the community and within the budget we hopefully can find for it. So.
That's fine. That's all fine. Good.
Thanks. Okay. Are you happy with?
Yep.
Okay. You want to move it? Okay, do we have a seconder? Oh, seconder. Any discussion? All those in favour?
I'd just like to apologise for this taking so long. It has been challenging, and it has been through our community board a couple of times, and it did get, I guess, put in the too hard basket, and I do apologise for that, and thank you for coming in today and speaking to it, and for taking the time to get the signatures and to engage in your community, and it's good to see that we've got a clear path of action today, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Joe. Excellent. Right, we'll move to item 7, the establishment of the Coastal Hazards Adaptation Planning Program.
Okay, you have a report in front of you. The purpose of the report is to seek endorsement of the Coastal Hazard Adaptation Program. We have a quick presentation we'll take you through, and then we'll be into it.
Kia ora koutou. It is a very short presentation because we've had the benefit of briefing you earlier, and also some engagement or significant engagement with the Coastal Hazards Working Group over time. Just to refresh you, what we're seeking today is endorsement of the Coastal Hazards Adaptation Planning Program and agreement that we would start with the first tranche of communities in the Littleton Mount Herbert area. Going back up to the purpose of the program, it's to provide communities and council with adaptive pathways that will allow us to plan for and respond to coastal hazard risks. The scope is low-lying inland and coastal communities across the district, so that's the city and Banks Peninsula, that will be impacted by sea level rise through coastal erosion, inundation and rising groundwater. We'd really like to acknowledge the significant support and advice we've had from the Coastal Hazards Working Group. I think we've had about 5 meetings in a very short period of time with the Coastal Hazards Working Group. I'm sure you're aware, but as a reminder, the group has expanded to include Ngāi Tahu representation and also ECAN representation, and we have Selwyn and Waimakariri District Council as observers. So we've had a lot of support from the Coastal Hazards Working Group in bringing the recommendations to you today.
So in terms of next steps, if the program is endorsed today, what we are planning to do, we have a Newsline story waiting in the wings. We have some updated pages for the council website. Importantly, we plan to hold a series of community workshops to help increase awareness about adaptation planning, and we've spread those workshops, presentations. We have the first one in Allendale, one at the Tannery to cover off that side of Christchurch, and another one at North Beach Memorial Hall. So hoping to get all of those done before Christmas. We'll be setting up a newsletter that will be providing regular updates to interested parties in this process, and we have a meeting scheduled with Ngāti Wheki and opportunities to meet with residents associations and other community groups over the next couple of months.
So that's our presentation. Questions?
Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. So engagement, I'm just thinking our young people were in just a minute ago telling us about their concerns, singing about their concerns. Katie, do you have focus groups in mind with this in terms of actually targeting particular, I mean, I think the youth need to be involved here, this is their future.
Absolutely,
So what are your plans for that?
So when we start the engagement proper on this program, and it'll be citywide engagement, we'll be making sure that we target youth as a particular audience as part of that, because we want to make sure, as you say, that we have their voice reflected in the decision-making process. So we absolutely will be looking at what we're going to be doing at the moment. The citywide engagement is not really planned until next year. Yeah, next year, sort of like mid next year, and so we can come back with some more details about that if you'd like to hear it.
That would be great. And thinking about the panels, the community panels, would you intend to have young people involved with those?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? The work that Sian Carville's been doing with the Governor's Base School is also occurring in other schools around the district, and so she's forming a network really of children and young people who are starting to engage in these issues, and I think that's going to be a really strong resource and network for us to tap into.
Excellent, thank you.
Yanni.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering what time the meeting is on the 2nd of December?
The meeting starts at 6 o'clock and goes till 7:30. So to make sure we get that after work time, give people a little bit of time to get there.
Thanks.
That's consistent across all of those.
Okay. Any other questions? Anne?
If that's okay, just another one. Just in the information we were given, you were focusing on the psychosocial and well-being aspects of this, given the issues that people of Christchurch have already been coping with. What does that look like? You know, how will you address that?
We've got some advice from Dr. Rob Gordon, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, around how to concretise the information, make it real, but also provide opportunities for people to make sense of that information in their own sort of social groups. So we'd be looking at potentially trying to get community networks involved in sharing information and talking together and those sorts of things. We're also going to be working with Jolie Wells, who has done a lot of work in that kind of space as well, around how we might hold our meetings, around what sort of supports we might put in place. We're very conscious of that kind of way of working from previous experience, so it'll just be something we've got on our minds. But I guess the key part of Dr. Rob Gordon's advice is you can't walk away from the issues, you have to make them very real, and then it's just about how people are able to process those issues themselves.
Thank you. Right, so it's been moved by the Mayor. I'm happy to second it. Debate.
Look, I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate staff on what is an outstanding program of work, which they've really committed a lot of time and effort to, and really engaged deeply with the communities over. And I'm just so thrilled, because I recall, you know, back when we were doing the Christchurch Replacement District Plan, the antagonism and challenges that were confronting the communities that felt they were at the front end of something being done to them, instead of the front end of a process that is going to deeply engage with them. And I just really wanted to acknowledge that publicly and to say thank you for the efforts you've done. I think you've gone through the different areas that we face as challenges and chosen the right area to begin. Banks Peninsula is very keen, and I know Andrew will probably talk on that, to get underway, because they can see what the future holds. But to start with an area that has significant areas of underdevelopment, because it's so easy to address the issues in underdeveloped areas, you simply put a line in the sand, literally, and allow no more, while you then look at what is able to be mitigated, how adaptation applies, and the time frames that you enable communities to look out to their own future and to reflect on what the science was saying back in the past, and whether the plan needs adapting for at that moment in time. It's a really good process. Looking at the developed areas beyond that, I think, is absolutely the right way to go. It gives more time for a really true sense of engagement and resolving some of the legacy issues, which I hope we will do tomorrow. So thank you very much. I just wanted to put that on the record, that this feels like a very good process, as contrasted completely to what was a very antagonistic process during the district plan replacement. So thank you very much.
James.
Kia ora. On the back of the Mayor's comments, which I support and acknowledge, I also want to point out and acknowledge the work done in the alternative options under number 4 there, because the community from Brooklands through to South Shore in particular should be involved, and we note that it's going to be in the second and third tranches for a very good reason, that we're looking, as the Mayor said, at the earthquake legacy issues before we get to this point. So thank you for all your work. Kia ora.
Andrew.
Thank you. I'm supportive of all the comments that have been made so far. I think the Coastal Hazards Working Group process has gone very well, and I'd also like to echo the acknowledgement of the work done by staff in supporting that group in these early stages. I also agree with starting the work in the Littleton Mount Herbert communities for all of the reasons stated in the report. These communities are small. There's a high awareness of the potential issues that they're facing, and these communities are already well engaged and have that high level of awareness. Clearly there are other areas that we will be needing to engage with in the future tranches of work, and that again is well noted in the report. I also think there's the opportunity for the work that we do with the Littleton Mount Herbert communities to inform the ways that we might approach those communities in the future. At the same time, realising that different communities will be affected in different ways, will want to engage in different ways, and that one size will not fit all. So what might work well for the Littleton Mount Herbert communities may not be the same approach that we would take in Brooklands or other parts of the eastern seaboard. There will be a need to be collaborative and to fully engage, and again I think this is well acknowledged, not only with communities but also with local runanga, and I'm sure Ngāti Wheke around Littleton Harbour will be very willing to engage, and I know they also have a very high awareness of the issues that we're dealing with here, and it's pleasing in terms of our engagement with Environment Canterbury that we've got Environment Canterbury representation on the working group, and I think that's been incredibly useful. So yeah, I'm very pleased to see this work underway, and I'm very comfortable with the approach that's proposed, so thank you.
Excellent. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Item 8. Implementation of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay.
This report is in response to a resolution made at your September committee meeting, and the purpose of it is to provide an overview of the key aspects of the new National Policy Statement on Urban Development and Council's proposed plan for implementing it. And that includes a work stream to improve the design quality of multi-unit development, and we'll be reporting back to you on options for that aspect of our implementation program in the first half of next year. Just quickly, a reminder of what national policy statements are and how they fit into the plan hierarchy. The NPS is a statutory instrument prepared under the RMA. It sits at the top of the hierarchy, and it is used by government to prescribe objectives and policies that are of national significance. And the matters of national significance that this NPS seeks to address are around having well-functioning urban environments that provide for community well-being, and providing sufficient development capacity to assist in particular with improved housing affordability. Ultimately, this NPS is designed to allow more urban development and housing through RMA plans and planning decisions, to ensure sufficient opportunities are available to meet housing and business needs, ensure the competitive operation of urban markets, and assist with housing access and affordability. You'll recall that we had a national policy statement on urban development capacity that was introduced in 2016, and we've done a lot of work to implement that in terms of our housing and business capacity assessment and our future development strategy, which you signed off a couple of years ago now, our space. And then in August last year, the government said that they wanted to go further and released a discussion draft, and the council provided a submission on that. Essentially that draft was signalling, although there weren't prescribed directions in that, but it was signalling that they were looking to promote much more intensification of our urban areas. And we provided a submission which talked about things like concerns about the one-size-fits-all response not being appropriate for a Christchurch context. It seemed like a sort of an Auckland issue that we were needing to address. Lack of need when we have reasonably good housing affordability compared to some of the other Tier 1 authorities, costs on council, etc., etc. Government then released its final MPS in August 2020. It now has full effect, and it addressed some of our more technical concerns, but not really those big issues that we raised concerns about. The key differences between the old MPS and the new MPS: we still have to undertake monitoring of urban development indicators. We still have to have a solid evidence base, including preparing housing and business capacity assessments. We still have to make sure that we have a future development strategy or a spatial strategy in place, and in particular that responds to any shortfall of housing and business land capacity. What is new is that we are required to remove minimum car parking rules, accept disability or mobility car parking requirements, and we're to do that without using the usual Schedule 1 consultation process. There are very, very strong intensification directions in specified areas, although up for unclear in some aspects in terms of their definition and application. There's a new direction in there to be responsive to unplanned and out-of-sequence development which provides significant development capacity. So that's a new policy direction that we did signal that we had significant concerns about in the draft. It essentially paves the way for development like greenfield development that we is currently not anticipated or planned for. In terms of the intensification directions, the MPS says that in these particular areas we need to intensify to specific levels. So in the city centre zones, realise as much development capacity as possible to maximise the benefits of intensification. So it's potentially unlimited, but maybe not if that's not maximising the benefits of intensification. In metropolitan centre zones, which we don't currently have, but we're directed to apply the nearest equivalent zone, we are required to enable at least 6-storey development. That doesn't mean that that 6-storey development must occur in those areas, but the plans must enable it. And the 6-storey requirements also apply to the walkable catchments around those centre zones, and also existing and planned rapid transit stops. And it doesn't stop there. We're also required to look at all other locations of the city and enable density and height commensurate with the level of accessibility and or demand, whichever is the greater. The MPS sets some statutory timeframes which we must meet, and they're identified in that table there. Work is underway on a number of those, the first of which is the July 2021 deadline for an updated housing capacity assessment, not business. Removing car parking minimums, we've started that work, and we have notified a plan change for consequential amendments to address that as well. And work is underway to look at the intensification provisions and with ECAN and our other partners to insert criteria for what significant development capacity means, which has to go into the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. So our high-level process at this point for meeting those statutory deadlines is set out in this diagram. So this, where we are here, is outlining the key requirements, and we've started work to identify the spatial areas for the intensification directions. It's quite unclear at this point, so there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done to look into that, and also the qualifying matters, which the MPS enables us to look at the circumstances where intensification may not be appropriate, but it's quite a high bar to meet, so we're still working through what that means for us. The next step in the process is to report back to the committee in a couple of weeks' time to talk about the definition of metropolitan centres and city centre zones and walkable catchments. In terms of the quality design aspect, work is underway looking at issues that have been raised with the existing RMD and RSDT areas and what it will mean for intensification at 6 stories and higher, and we will be reporting back on the outcome of that work in the first half of next year.
Thanks, Adele and David. Just for additional context as well, it would be appropriate to update councillors on the conversations that are occurring with local government New Zealand. As Della said, all Tier 1 councils, so major cities, are in the same situation. This is now a legislative requirement from central government, so we are working closely with our colleagues in other councils and also with LGNZ, and they're taking the lead on their liaising with MHUD and MFE on the 2 critical issues from our perspective. The first is around definition, so as staff talked about, what a definition of a metropolitan centre is, what definition of walkable distances are and things like that, and the second is qualifying matters, which the earlier deputation referred to, and qualifying matters relate to whether there are provisions or whether there should be exemptions from any of the now legislative rules in the MPS. So we're looking for consistency and alignment between councils. All councils are obviously now conscious that different decisions made by different councils will variously expose councils to legal risk about how they interpret and how they define these things. So we are trying to work as closely as we can. We're still waiting for much of the national guidance, notwithstanding that this is already now in effect. This legislation is in effect, so the legislation took effect before any of the national guidance was issued, but we are working with both LGNZ and also directly with government, and I'm sure Andrew will talk to some of the other issues raised by the metro sector mayors that are affecting their councils as well.
Thank you. Questions? Leanne?
Sorry, I have to go. I'm laying a wreath on behalf of the citizens of Christchurch for Armistice Day, so at the Bridge of Remembrance. So, and I would like to participate in the debate, so I won't use questions to debate much, other than just to note the extreme frustration with central government imposing Auckland rules on the rest of the country, particularly here in Christchurch, when we've been through a land use recovery plan, an entire replacement district plan process. It does seem very frustrating, particularly when over-intensification is a big issue for our residents, and it is something that we're committed to addressing. So can we, we've got the some suggested alternative amendments there, but the question is, because there is a legitimate question, whether I've got the right wording. So I've identified that the National Policy Statement actually requires us to change the district plan, including the removal of minimum parking requirements, which must be implemented without consultation by February 2022. So that's an absolute. We have no say over that whatsoever, and people don't get a say, even though we've heard from Deputy Chair Helen Broughton that around the implications of that requirement, that is a given. It's an absolute.
Yes, for the car parking, there is no exemptions. Yeah,
Right.
That's right.
And the intensification requirements, they will have a public consultation, but they have to be notified no later than August in 2022.
Correct.
That's right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, it's the second one that I'm really concerned that I've got the wrong wording. That we're asking you for further advice on definitions within the MPS, and that's good. And the basis for exceptions, but I'm just wondering if that phrase is right. What I meant was that language of qualifying factors or whatever it is. Is that sufficient direction to you guys?
Yeah, that captures it.
You know what it means?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. And the staff you will also provide advice on council's desire to restrain over intensification. It's right clear in the paper that you're doing that for us, but I just kind of wanted us to have it specifically out there because that's what the councillors want to do in terms of backing their residents. Yeah. But it is a challenge, is what you're telling us. Good. That's all, and I'll have to go. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, thank you. And we in the paper it's got the requirements from 3-storey to 6. Is it still covered with regards to protection of the neighbours, with regards to like being so close to a boundary, etc. So although the national policy statement wants us and is directing us to go to in certain areas up to 6 stories, even up to 3 stories in areas that have only ever maximum been 2 stories, that is still controlled by the distance to the boundary, etc.
So the MPS doesn't preclude us from putting and introducing provisions in our plan to deal with effects like who we're discussing in terms of relationship to boundary and access to light and things like that. The extent to which recession planes can be used, we might be a little bit limited. It doesn't say that we can't, but MFE has signalled that if recession planes do overly limit the ability to intensify, that we need to look very closely at the need for those. But where this might come to with the density done well package, if you like, is that in order to deal with all those boundary effects in particular, sites may need to be larger and amalgamated. So we're not suggesting it's 6 stories on a small site, right
or
up to
3
the boundary.
stories, because I know we have had in the past in Addington, a couple came to us. They had restored a villa, and then there's a 3 or whatever it was next, and they got that on the other side. So what's the point of them doing up their beautiful villa? And so they sold it to a developer and that got bulldozed. And then more, we're destroying the amenity. So I think we've got to be very careful when we look at what we're doing the other way round. Just a comment. The other question, I had was Helen, when she presented, mentioned she'd been advised by Wellington flexibility. But flexibility in my definition perhaps is very different to the gentleman or the lady that you've been talking to in Wellington. So do you have some ideas on that?
So that's to do with their qualifying matters, and the MPS itself specifies what those are in 3.32 if you care to look. But it's a really high bar. So they are matters like, the ones that are listed are matters of national importance that are set out in the Resource Management Act. So it's around natural hazards and significant heritage values, natural features and landscapes, significant indigenous vegetation, like really important nationally recognised values. And nationally significant infrastructure. One example might be the airport noise contours. But there is a matter under clause H, which is any other matter which makes high density development inappropriate in an area. So that's the sort of grey area. But the guidance has said that is a very high threshold, and we have to go through the plan review process and justify it under the RMA Section 32 process. And protection, I think it's pretty clear from MFE that protection of existing amenity values is unlikely to be an acceptable qualifying matter.
Yeah.
And not on top of that, the guidance says that, and the MPS says that you shouldn't be using that to have blanket protections over areas. If there are values that need to be protected, whether it's if it's a natural hazard, for example, you don't say, okay, the whole area is a no-go area. You have to look at it on a site-by-site basis and go, okay, well, this one might be out, or this part of this one might be out. So it's really looking at that very fine-grained detail.
So the last question, is, so technically those areas in our city which are regarded as character areas would be under threat with the national policy statement? Because our
We've still got to work through that, but my personal view is that areas that have gone through a robust planning process like we have through the IHP process, and the character areas that survived that process, if you like, are probably good contenders for that. But those areas that didn't make it through that, the evidence threshold, if you like, from that process will be much harder to justify.
Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you for really making it very clear about what we actually can't do here, and thank you, Helen, for the outlining those things. We are being told what to do here, and council has very little choice in how we respond. But I'm thinking about the parking issue. How closely are we working with ECAN in terms of providing public transport options for people who won't be able to use their cars if they can't park them? How's that happening? Is there a relationship? How close is the relationship, and what's happening in that space?
You answer that one.
That's right. Yeah. So whilst we can't obviously not remove the minimum requirements, the MPS does strongly encourage us to look at how we address parking issues and through other means, and one of those could be through public transport. So yeah, we are working closely with ECAN. Obviously, there's a future public transport business case at the moment that's been developed, and we know there's a big relationship between the availability of parking and the encouragement that gives to people to drive versus the use of public transport. So this could be a chicken and egg situation. If there's less parking, we might be able to get more people on public transport, which gives more funding for public transport, and we could improve the services. So there is a bit of a situation there where we can work together, and we are working together on that. So yep. And I know there's a parking strategy coming to you in the next month or two. Yep.
Thank you, Mel.
I've got three questions. One is in the MFE guidance on like what definition of walkable is. Why do you think they've left it so open? Because it does make it really hard to interpret. So I was wondering why you thought they'd done that rather than just saying it must be 400 metres or 5 minutes.
I believe it was left for councils to define because there was an acknowledgement through the discussion draft process that there are some areas, particularly areas with steep hills, people live up on hills, like Wellington, for example, where 800 metres might not be appropriate because it's hard graft getting around, whereas in a flat city like us, it's easier to walk, so you can walk further distance. But it is internationally well recognised that walkability is somewhere between 400 and 800, but possibly 800 and more, depending on the environment.
Mm-hmm. Second question was, in those 4 locations, the central city zone, that table, can you just explain the bit about in all other locations about enabling density commensurate with the level of accessibility and or demand? Because I don't really understand what that means.
We're still working through it as well, but our understanding from MFE is that we're required to look at general accessibility around the city, and we have got some tools to be able to do that in terms of our levels of service for transport, in terms of which areas of the city have good access to key services or amenities like schools and supermarkets and things like that. So in those areas, the direction is that we should be intensifying because they're accessible to those things, but it may not be. They've left it to us to determine what the appropriate level of intensification is. So they're not specifying it must be 6 stories, but the assumption is that we will look to whether it's infill or 2 to 3 stories or whatever it is, but to intensify around those areas of good accessibility. The other areas of market demand, it's a little bit more unclear. The guidance suggests that we look at a number of metrics in terms of what parts of the city people are looking to locate in, to build their houses, to buy their houses. The parts of the areas of the city where there are lots of resource consents seeking to go denser. And so looking at a whole lot of metrics to work out where the market is saying they want intensification and to enable it in those areas, but they've left it to us to determine how much. So it's quite grey.
Yeah. And then the last question was around the car parking. So, and it's been brought up before, but just to clarify about, like if a new mall was to go in, say somewhere, or whatever, they wouldn't necessarily, or a business wouldn't necessarily need to have any car parking. But is that right? But they wouldn't, yeah.
So, well, yes and no. So, we're not allowed to have minimum parking standards in our district plan. It's left to the developer to determine what quantum of car parking they need for their business. And they may, and in the circumstances of supermarkets, they tend to want to provide more car parking than our plan indicates they should. So they're probably going to do that anyway. The flip side to that is that if you have a resource consent lodged where a development might be a high trip generator, generate significant effects on the local network, or generate issues of safety in terms of the design of access and things like that. But where that development may generate effects, and one of the mitigating methods for addressing those effects may be to provide car parking on site, that may be something that can be required as part of the resource consent process in terms of managing effects, but we can't actually require them through the plan. Is that fair?
Yeah, we're still trying to work through exactly what we can and can't do. It is, as you've said, a lot of this is quite, there's grey areas here. But yeah, our ability to require parking is going to be very constrained. Yeah, so. The
tool that the government is suggesting we use to manage that off-site parking is parking management strategies. So it refers to those in the MPS, and it's saying you can't require minimum parking, but make sure you've got the tools available if there is on-street parking stress. Make sure you've got the toolkit there through a, what's the actual term that they use? The
comprehensive parking management plan.
So that there are tools available to, whether it's to start charging for on-street parking or metering or those sort of things. So that's, and we do have that for our suburban centres and our central city underway.
Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. I just sent some additional resolutions to be included in the, well, separate than the amendment, but additional. I just wanted to check because I don't understand the process between this and the Greater Christchurch Urban Growth Partnership, where I see, like when I read the cabinet paper in Auckland, it seems quite a collaborative working together to address all the same things that we're being asked to do. So I just wondered if anyone can kind of give an update on if that process overlaps, or if not, why not? Because I just don't quite understand it.
I can probably talk a little bit. So as you'll be aware, the Greater Christchurch Councils are currently out consulting on the Greater Christchurch 2050, and Greater Christchurch 2050 is anticipated to be the precursor to the conversation with government about a urban growth partnership, or under the urban growth agenda cabinet paper that you're referring to. So an urban growth partnership is a formal agreement between local authorities and the government that traverses both urban design and transport issues generally. They're the kind of two large elements, and they variously exist in Auckland, the Auckland to Hamilton corridor, Bay of Plenty and Wellington, and so we've been talking with central government on the development of a urban growth partnership to reflect the anticipated development across Greater Christchurch in the next 30 years, but we need to conclude the Greater Christchurch 2050 piece of work in the first instance.
So when is that likely to come back to us for consideration?
Next year.
And do we know when, like end of next year, or?
I don't have the date off the top of my head, sorry. I'm anticipating that it will be in the middle of next year. All of the local councils, including the regional council and central government, would be in a position to talk about the next steps following on from the consultation from Greater Christchurch 2050.
And what's to stop us from doing it earlier? Like, why wouldn't we actually agree to the partnership before we spend all this time and resource doing all the work?
Well, the way the partnership is set up is that you, first of all, need to have a plan for what you want to achieve, and then the partnership is expected to deliver on that plan. So Greater Christchurch 2050 is the first part of that.
Thanks. Just the other question, final question from me was just trying to understand the implications of this for things like Mirabelle Mall, which has obviously got a resource consent to expand, a whole bunch of issues there around car parking, I presume. Would this kind of, what does this do to like existing consents that have been granted in terms of things like that, for example?
So this would take effect. In fact, it essentially takes effect. The car parking changes. The MPS takes effect as of August. We've still got the parking rules in the plan, so they still need to comply with those. But they could use the national policy statement as a matter to consider through that consenting process until we remove the parking requirements by February 2022. So yeah, if Mirabelle Mall was going through another consenting process, then they could take account of the NPS and use that as part of the consenting process if they wanted to vary the parking requirements. That's an option for any developer.
So that's just a variation to the consent. They would just seek a variation based on the NPS, effectively.
They could do,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Or they could wait until the parking requirements are removed by February 22, and then they no longer need to comply with the parking requirements in the district plan. So.
Okay. Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding to the amendment, paragraph 3, I would like to ask staff, particularly regarding to those intensification directions. In here, whether staff, before staff present this further advice to the council, whether you will go through the consultation, particularly regarding the definition, like intensification or metropolitan center, whether it's a whole kind of suburban center, just part of that. I just want to know whether still through this consultation process or just you create by yourself idea. Yeah.
So in terms of defining what is a metropolitan centre and the city centre zones, staff will do the technical work as they would implementing the national planning standard anyway, because it's part of the national planning standard. So we will do that initial work and brief council on that in the next month or so. The opportunity for the public to have a say on that is when we go out for pre-plan change notification. So part of that plan change process, that plan change will identify the areas subject to intensification and the design provisions and everything that go along with that, and that is signalled on the process diagram, I think, to occur at the beginning of 2022.
So you mean the public or community still opportunity to feedback to the council?
They will at that point. Just bearing in mind that that plan change process is a statutory process prepared under the Resource Management Act. So if any person is looking to reclassify or come to a different conclusion on what those centres are, they still have to meet the same tests in the Resource Management Act, so they still have to have the same evidential basis for it, if that makes sense. So it's, evidence-based.
And
clarify that on the one hand, the car parks, not going to be able to put car parks outside residential areas, but malls are going to be able to create more car parks. Is that correct? Is that what we're hearing? Have the ability to have more?
So there's nothing in this national policy statement that prevents people providing car parking. So if they want to provide car parking, then they can. There is some rules in our plan in terms of where car parking is located. So in some zones we will require consent for parking for amenity purposes in some cases. But this is about removing the minimum number of parking. It's not about limiting setting a maximum amount of parking that you can provide.
Cool, thank you. That's clear.
Tim.
Thank you. I guess when we go out to consult on this in 2022, as per your plan, I think we've got to be very clear and have councillors have a good understanding, and especially relay that to the public about what they can really kind of question and what they can kind of ask for change. Because as we've heard from Helen, her definition of flexibility from Wellington was one thing, but the actual flexibility from Wellington is really, really limited to things that really are, you couldn't really take effect anyway because they're protected already. So I guess when we use that word consult, we've got to be really, really careful with it. Because my concern is the public think it's the council doing a lot of things, whereas our hands are tied. So why would we car parking? How could we consult on something we can't control?
Like any plan change, we have to give effect to those higher order documents that we outlined in the triangle. And so anyone else that does a private plan change or wants a change to the plan still has to give effect to those higher order documents.
But what I guess I'm saying is you can go out and consult on people say, I don't like this, although that's really great, but it doesn't do it. It doesn't affect it. But what can they truly question, and actually what can we change?
Tim, we're not on debate just yet. Phil?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Did I get the question? Did I get the impression that if cars are out of the people's driveways and they're parking down the street, we'll then have to go and get permits for parking a car on the side of the road like they do in Wellington? It seems to be a daft way of doing something. Did I get that impression from what you said?
No. I suppose it's up to council. It's up to you as to how we manage the on-street parking. So there's nothing in this MPS that says we must require permits or limit on-street parking at all. It's all about we can't require off-street parking. So I suppose what I was alluding to before is there's I think Central City parking policy that's being developed and that will come to you, and there is tools that we can use to manage on-street parking, and that will be entirely your choice. There's nothing in the NPS that forces you to do that or not, as to how you want to manage on-street parking. We made a decision that we'll just keep it the way it is and just see how it goes. So yeah, there's absolutely no requirement to do permits.
But those tools are there available to make use of.
Yeah, well, I don't. Yeah, and one last question: we have no recourse at all to push back on this parking thing, or we have?
No, we pushed back with the submission that we did last year. This is, from what I understand, it is subordinate legislation that was given rural assent. So it has that effect. Yep.
All right, excellent. So we've got the 4 in front of us, which I'm happy to move. Do we have someone to second those? Thanks, James. Also, we've had a couple come through from Yanni. Firstly, the first one, Yanni, it's probably best to rewrite that the Christchurch City Council request a meeting with local government MPs to raise concerns over the impact of the MPS-UD on. The second one, actually, the Minister can't grant an exemption on what you've actually asked for the exemption to be put for. So I can't accept that as an amendment because he can't do that. So.
As Mike said, that we can write to the Minister, but it would be inappropriate of us to ask the Minister to do something that legally the Minister can't do. So that under the legislation, the Minister can't grant an exemption from the MPS on the basis of the second part of that paragraph, which is about constructive collaboration under an urban growth partnership agreement.
We've had a housing school in the past, we've had lots of unique arrangements in terms of the city. So I don't know who is responsible for someone like that.
Well, it's a law now that has rural assent, so no one can choose to not follow the law, including the Minister responsible for it. So.
Just in terms of probably the question about the urban growth partnership, I mean, the parking requirements, for example, don't just apply to the 5 big cities, they apply pretty much to every district in New Zealand, every district that has more than 10,000 people in it. And most of those are not having urban growth partnership discussions with government. So this has to be done regardless of urban growth partnership discussion.
Question.
Excellent. So Jake was happy to second that, but before we just go into debates, because we've obviously got 2 amendments, I'll just check. James, would you be happy to include that in?
Yeah, we're sort of doing all this stuff anyway.
So
fine.
Yanni and Jake, are you happy if we just include that into the substantive now instead of actually? Okay, cool. We'll just all put it together. Then we can just debate it all as one. Okay, debate. James.
Yeah, look, this national policy statement is nothing more than an Auckland policy statement. I think we all know that. We could do with streamlining council processes and the planning and consenting pathways, but also incentivising what we need more of and limiting what we don't. But I think we all share the same feeling and sentiment around the table that this just does absolutely none of that. Some of our biggest planning issues in the city relate to parking, or lack thereof, and deeply inappropriate intensification in residential zones. So this will only exacerbate what is already broken. There's no sense in me voting against the resolutions up there, as it's just really for receiving and noting. And I would obviously like to stress, if that's not already clear, that my seconding of the recommendation is purely pro forma. But at the very least, I just want to take this opportunity to have on record how horrifically tone deaf I think this Auckland policy statement is, and how it is nothing more than attempting to cram a round peg into a square hole. So, you know, it's really sad for Christchurch, I think, when we see stuff like this. And I'll be supporting the recommendations.
Andrew.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that these are noting provisions here. We're receiving a report. I mean, certainly agreeing to these resolutions agrees to the further work being done on the report back. It doesn't mean that we agree with this NPS. And this really is an Auckland solution, which feels like a really poor fit for the rest of the country, including Christchurch. Is designed to deal with a demand problem. We actually don't have a demand problem here. In fact, in parts of the city, including the central city, we've got exactly the opposite, hence the fact that we've still got a number of vacant sites. For example, the 7-storey limit put in the city, into the central city after the earthquakes, was designed to see a larger number of sites developed less intensively so that we got site coverage and we didn't end up with vacant sites. The idea put forward by this NPS that we should allow no height limit in the central city almost certainly would lead to an intensification of development across a smaller number of sites. So a small number of high-rise buildings and a large number of sites remaining vacant. That indicates to me that this is not a good fit for Christchurch. So there are some things that we need to do, and the further work will inform them. We absolutely need to explore the opportunities for exemption or qualifying matters, is the technical term. We need to ensure that our interpretation of metropolitan centre, which again is an Auckland expression, it's not one we use here in Christchurch, is well understood and is appropriate for what we want in Christchurch, and also the definition of walkable catchment, and there's been some discussion of that already. We need to make sure that we do continue to use our district plan to the extent that we can to deal with over-intensification issues, and there are plenty of examples of those that have been brought to us by various communities around the city, not least by Deputation this morning, and that we end up using the district plan to get appropriate outcomes for Christchurch rather than the type of over-intensification that destroys local amenity and which is not supported by our communities. And we also need to fully understand and fully consider the relationship between intensification, which may well be imposed on us through this NPS, and the need for supporting infrastructure. So these are all decisions that we may quite possibly not naturally make for the city, but there is obviously a relationship between the need to intensify, imposed on us by this NPS, and the resulting imposition of the need to fund and create supporting infrastructure for that intensification. So there are a few things here that are quite important. I do agree that we need to be working with government to find a way through this. We need to be engaging with the appropriate minister. We need to be engaging through LGNZ with other cities. There needs to be a joined up approach across the country to mitigate legal risk of different interpretations. I look forward to the further work being done, and that's the only reason I'm supporting this today.
Mel.
I agree with what everyone said. One thing that hasn't been brought up but is in this paper under the risks is about the cost of this to council and our ratepayers, because we need to, you know, our staff have got to spend time working out what the definitions are and going through the district plan and making the changes to it. Probably, you know, it's a very intensive process. It needs to be done over a short period of time. across the whole country when we've just had COVID-19 and all councils are under financial stress, including our own. So I think if the government wants to, has introduced these changes, they should actually follow it up with some budget. So I challenge our MPs and the government to do something about it.
Catherine.
I think this is incredibly frustrating. Knowing, especially from the community where I represent in Central Riccarton or the Islam area, Upper Riccarton, when we've been fighting the issue of intensification in our area, this is just a further blow to that, and it's really frustrating to have just being told by people who don't quite understand how our community operate, and I think it would be the same for the wider Christchurch as well. And I think it is incredibly frustrating that we are being imposed with the same rules from a complete different city that's very different from ours. While I'd be reluctantly supporting this because it is just a paper of receiving and noting, but I really look forward to hopefully arranging a meeting with the local MPs and having a further discussion and hopefully getting them to understand how our community needs something different and something a bit more tailored to our needs and our requirements.
Okay, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. I think James Goff's probably put it the best today in terms of, I think, an Auckland problem that's been pushed on the rest of the country. I mean, it's very clear this is an Auckland plan that's been even worsely written by Wellington bureaucrats, and I don't think it's something we should, accept as a city. And look, I'm the same. I'll reluctantly support the recommendations, but I would urge the public of Christchurch to contact your local members of parliament. There's absolutely no excuse that this needs to occur here, and everyone in the city, whether it be residents or residents groups, can literally rise up, write into your members of parliament and get something changed. We have a government that has a clear majority. There's absolutely no excuse that this needs to exist. So I'd urge people to write in, tell your MPs that this is unacceptable and protect Christchurch.
Yanni.
Thank you. I understand the sentiment behind what's trying to be achieved with this policy statement, and in fact reviews of the RMA have been quite critical of government not providing enough national direction. But if anyone in the country needed less central government direction, it would be Christchurch. We've had that extensively after the earthquake, but before the earthquake we'd already done a really comprehensive piece of work on a greater Christchurch urban development strategy, which actually sets up most of the things that this policy statement was trying to achieve, but was actually done with the community. And so I can't see any need for government to be telling us what to do. We did actually try and improve the L3 and L4 zones in 2012 through Plan Change 53 to address some of the amenity issues. We had Share an Idea, we had the Christchurch Blueprint, we've had the Housing Accord, we had the Land Use Recovery Plan, we've had the District Plan Review, we've just had in 2008 the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy. We're currently doing a Christchurch 2050 strategy, and we're now being asked to do this. It just makes no sense at all, and a number of things in it are just totally contrary to the community being involved in planning at a local level. There's no doubt in my mind that this city has been over-planned for the last decade, and we don't need more work and resources going into simply doing more planning. What we actually need to do is get a stable base from which to develop. So we should be going back to government, I think, quite strongly and saying this is not the right approach for Christchurch. We've been over-planned at the moment. We actually want to work constructively with you through the Urban Growth Partnership to address some of the concerns that you may have. But actually this policy statement will not deliver on the benefits that we need in terms of our community. And so therefore, I will support the information coming to us, but I think we do need to be strong in going back to government, seeking an exemption and seeking a better way of doing urban development.
Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still reluctant to support, but still support because while we try to find an alternative way, can make this national policy statement, urban development, to more practical, more implementable. So that's the way. So engage with all the local MPs and write the letter to the responsible minister to let them know, this the kind of document. It's not just fit for the Auckland super city. Should be covered, all kind of the metro city, but need to more fit for purpose. That's very important. Particularly, we heard from the deputation regarding those kind of the remove those car parking area. That's quite seriously, particularly like Catherine mentioned earlier, in the Richland area, Upper Richland area, or even in the Hornby area or some other the activity center. This will make getting worse. The other one is if definition the staff provide to us, if some of the suburban area is kind of the metropolitan central room, but at least 6 level, 6 stories. I just don't know whether this kind of the beast or not. It's a big effect, to those the visual amenity, etc. But at least regarding this amendment, we might have seeking alternative way and continue the negotiation, continue have a conversation with the local MP and with the responsible minister. So I'm support this one.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you. Look, for the reasons given before, and I do think James Goff and Sam McDonald's 2 comments have been really highlight the whole problem. When we talk about cost to council, it's not just to this unit, but if you look at the work that's got to be done right through our council, and I mention that because one of the simplest things that people will be able to understand is parking. Without any on-site parking required, I've been waiting 3 months to get white lines to define residents' car parks on a residential street that has issues with people parking over them. So our council is not able to react quickly to this changing environment. So we've got to do a whole lot of work through this whole organisation to keep up with this NPS, which has been over-engineered for the last 10 years. And if you try and get someone towed when you're rushing to work, you've got to wait for the officer to get here, double check that it's actually right, then they've got to call the tow truck, etc., etc. It's just one simple thing, and affected by this whole NPS, we are actually not geared up to manage. I went to a workshop with council, a working party, a government working party in 2013 with council lawyers to explain to them that Christchurch had the best future planning for land development than any other city in New Zealand, and it wasn't listened to then, and it's still not being listened to, which is a real shame. They talk about intensification. The residents of Christchurch are okay with intensification, but as we've heard, it's about the quality of that intensification that is so important, and just jamming heaps and heaps of residency on one site reduces the value of what you have for the human beings living there. And we've had that in other developments we've had in the future. I thought we had learnt something from those developments along in the old days from Braham Street, etc. It seems that we haven't, and the government hasn't either. I totally support meeting with our MPs and talking to them about this, and as Sam said, I really do hope our residents pick this up and write to their MPs, because it is being driven by Wellington fairly sadly based on Auckland for Christchurch and other areas. So I will be supporting this because it is actually starting that ball.
Thank you. Anne?
Obviously, we're all really concerned about this and we feel very powerless about it, but I think it's about identifying the things that we can do, and I think those have been mentioned, going and meeting with our MPs, getting action through writing to them. Also, it's encouraging to know that LGNZ is actually doing some work with other TAs to actually raise concerns, and that collective voice will be really important. So we're receiving these today and support the changes there. We need to work together to make a stand against these things that are being imposed upon us.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Sorry, and I don't normally rejoin a debate, especially when I haven't heard what people have said, but I've had an opportunity to reflect quickly on the additions. And the one thing that I'm going to add to all of this is that every single residents group that I've spoken to about this issue have said how much they support intensification. It is a really important focus, particularly for our future and for environmental considerations, that we intensify those areas in an appropriate way so that we are able to see developments within brownfields rather than greenfields developments in the far off distance, which will see further stress go on our city. And the costs are sheeted home to us every time a corridor opens, the Northern Corridor. Every time there are increased opportunities for development out in the outer reaches, you get urban sprawl and you don't get the benefits of the proximity that cities can enable. We've still got a lot of work to do in our central city, a lot of work. And, I'm really intensely focused on the need to build momentum around getting those inner city residential developments going, and every time we push things out into the wider regions for greenfields developments, that's another wasted opportunity in terms of the intensification that happens. Every single residents group I've talked to have expressed concerns about over-intensification, the removal of trees, the removal of amenity, and the increased pressure of car parking, and that's been raised over and over again. It's been raised in Riccarton, Addington, Spraydon. You've probably gone through all of these, Maryvale, Richmond. You just list them, especially in those areas that are within relatively close proximity to the central city. So we're not opposed to intensification. We're not opposed to the concerns that have been raised or sought to be addressed by government through the National Policy Statement. What we are concerned about is that this is a one-size-fits-all approach, which has picked up an Auckland issue and created an Auckland solution and imposed it on the rest of the country. In Christchurch, it doesn't belong. It's not a good fit.
Thank you. Well, it's always good when we have one voice. So on that note, I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Carried. I'm going to adjourn for 10 minutes, so we'll restart at 11:35, and Phil will take the chair for the last two meeting items.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into it. We do. So we're moving now on. Well, no, you take over. We're moving now on to the item 9, the draft submission for the Selwyn District Plan. So we have some very intelligent people down the end of the table that are going to tell us all about it. Not this end.
Don't stress them out.
And dare I say, before we get too carried away, this should just whistle through without any hassle. Okay?
Haven't you read my amendments?
Have you got that, Yanni?
All right. So yes, this probably actually follows on. There's a bit of a segue between what we just discussed before the break and now. So there's two submissions that we're talking about today. One is on the Selwyn District Plan, which is their 10-year review of their plan, and but there's also a plan change as well that it's a private plan change that has been lodged with the Selwyn District Council that we're also got a draft submission there on as well. And I just want to give a bit of context or some recent context to that. As was sort of mentioned in the previous presentation, the MPS, we talked a lot about the intensification changes and the car parking changes. Adele also briefly mentioned the responsive planning changes in the MPS, and that so the MPS is about building up, but also building out. Providing more housing both up and both by out. Now, so the MPS enables requires councils to be more responsive to out-of-sequence development. Now, what's happened in Selwyn, just in the last few weeks since this MPS came out, is developers have seen this opportunity, and this plan change 64 is the first one that has seen the opportunity of being responsive and is proposing a new greenfield development, an extension to Farringdon and Rolleston. We've just been alerted by Selwyn District Council, and we're working very closely with them, that in the last week they've received another 3 plan changes, and they received one the week before. So there is now, these have been lodged, so these are public, but they haven't been notified yet, so we will inform you when they're notified. But I'm just putting it in the context of what is coming because of this MPS. So this one in Rolleston 64 is 900 or almost 1,000 houses in Rolleston. Last week they had a plan change for 2,000 houses in Lincoln, for another 800 in Prebleton, another 800 in Rolleston, and the week before another 500 in West Melton. So, so that's about 5,000 houses all up that are being proposed through private plan changes as out-of-sequence development. So this is extension of greenfield areas beyond what has previously been anticipated. Some are within the urban development boundaries, like this one in 1964, but some, especially the 2,000 in Lincoln and the 800 in Prebleton and the 500 in West Melton, are beyond the urban development boundaries. So it just shows you a bit of the what the market is doing in response to the MPS, and I think also in response to, as you're talking about roads, the opening of the Southern Motorway. People are seeing the attractiveness of development, and so more and more of this is coming. We are working very closely with Selwyn District, and we've had a discussion about how we can collectively respond to this, and also at a greater Christchurch partnership level. It's still very early days as to how we're going to respond to this. They have recognised that for this plan change 64, it's the notification closes next week, so the only option at this stage is the submission. But we're hoping for the other ones, maybe we can be a bit more proactive and look at options around those. And yeah, one of the issues is how do we sort out the transport issues that these will create. So yeah, that's just a bit of a context of what's potentially coming. If that's helpful.
Yeah, yep. Thank you very much. Is there any questions from anybody? I didn't think so. Thank you. Yanni and Tim.
Just so I've just sent through the Greater Christchurch Urban Settlement Pattern Housing Action and that was to align with the Selwyn District Plan Review. And I know that we've only just had the information, but I just wondered if we could attach the table of actions in the submission, because we've got one sort of sentence around it, but it doesn't seem to kind of go far enough. And I guess the request would be basically that they do consider social and affordable housing as part of the district plan, as part of this district plan review, and make sure that they've got provision to have scope around it.
Yeah. So what we've discussed this with Selwyn quite a bit. The submission we've put in, we think is sufficient to give scope for the for them to implement the social and affordable housing action plan. I understand there is a briefing to council on that action plan in early December, so that will provide a bit more context as to what is.
We're getting so just the timing for that is March 2021. So we're not going to get the action plan until then. Is that, in terms of their plan change process, sufficient time? Do we know when the hearings will be?
We don't know exactly when the hearings will be, but it should align. They are aware of that issue, and that they are trying to make sure that things do align. But until the action plan is landed and is approved, then it's too early to know exactly what actions this plan change will have to.
I think the concern I've got is that the action plan will actually have not actions to do stuff, it'll be actions to do more work to find out what to do. And so by the time that that's finished, it would seem like they've missed the opportunities. So I don't know if we can be more specific, or we could talk to the staff that are behind that action plan and see what sort of things we should be putting in. I mean, things like inclusionary zoning seem the obvious one, that we would ask that they set aside an amount of land that's rezoned for development from rural into space for affordable and social housing, where we just make that direct request rather than rely on recommendations that have yet to be developed.
No, so that was, we don't have inclusionary zoning in our plan, and there is some legal issues with inclusionary zoning. I know Auckland have just going through that at the moment. It was rejected in Queenstown through the Environment Court, and Auckland have also had similar issues there legally. So there is quite a lot more work, as you say, to go through with inclusionary zoning. We haven't put it in our plan, but we are open to it in terms of that work. So we are a bit conscious that we don't want to impose something on Selwyn that we haven't been able to do ourselves. We want to work in partnership with them through this.
I hear what you're saying. I get that.
That's why we've linked it to the action plan rather than being more directive.
We did in 2007 sign up to the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy, which had inclusionary zoning as one of the key actions, top 20 priority actions. So, I mean, 2007, it's almost, quite considerable time has passed. So, I mean, I'm happy for us just to have something that asks them to consider it rather than say they have to have it, so that if it does turn out that it's something. But, I mean, I don't know, it's just frustrating that we keep doing these district plan reviews. We've got all this work that we're told needs to inform them, but we never seem in a position to actually be able to put things forward in this social and affordable housing space. So.
Thanks, Shani. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you feel that in the documents, and I think it's probably stronger in attachment B with regards to the change 64 request, about the emphasis on the public transport between the Selwyn District and Christchurch City? Because it seems that we're mentioning about public transport, but it could be defined as within Rolleston and those areas, rather than the concern I thought from us as a council was all those vehicles travelling to Christchurch and affecting our city, where it's our ratepayers having to pay for dealing with it.
Yeah, that's definitely our concern. We can make that stronger if you don't think that's stronger. I think the difference between the Selwyn District Plan versus Plan Change 64 is Selwyn District Plan is not actually, they're not proposing any new greenfield developments through the district plan. It's the plan change, the private plan change, that is proposing an additional greenfield development. So that's where the pressure comes in.
Yeah, I realise that, but if we don't look at those private plan changes, you're suddenly going to have a jigsaw with no connection. And so I do think that there is a responsibility for the Selwyn District Council, because we have the same things. I'm not telling them how to suck eggs. So there is an issue there, especially if we're looking at climate change as the school, the governors with all those vehicles on the road, etc. But we're never going to have any good public transport interlinking if we don't start driving it somewhere. Thank you.
Leanne, you're done. Right. Would any more questions? No. Thank you. Jake would move it. Thank you.
Small amendment in that last sentence.
Where am I looking here?
Have you got something that you wanted to send through, Yanni? Or?
It's just under point 34. We request that the relevant recommendations of the Social and Affordable Housing Action Plan be incorporated into the plan change, and that consideration of inclusionary zonings. And the consideration of inclusionary zoning. Well, we've seen it, and it is, and it's already in the urban development strategy and about a zillion other documents. But it's not saying that they do it, it's just saying that they consider it.
Yeah, just remember the action, the way that the GCP process works is that the Social and Affordable Action Plan will be briefed to all of the TAs and will need to be formally adopted because the Greater Christchurch Partnership doesn't have this delegation. Will need to be formally adopted and agreed by each of the relevant councils. So, yeah, it's not a requirement to put it in the district plan. Yeah.
Okay, and this is just to get us in the tent. We're not disputing that they can go ahead with it, but it's just to get us in the tent to start the race, so to speak. Rightio. Anyone who's... Okay. So who have I got? Jake's moved it. Melanie's seconded. Yeah, thank you, mate. So I'll just move it there. Is that just...
Yep.
Yeah, so it's moved and seconded. All those in favour? Pardon? Oh, sorry. All right. There's no... Okay, debate. I've only just got here. Debate. Thank you, Leanne.
I feel like I would be disappointing the chairman if I didn't at least offer a view on this important matter. But it really is to reinforce some of the comments I made before, and that is that sort of, and I was concerned to hear your advice that additional private plan changes have been lodged in the Selwyn district, and it's not that it's the Selwyn district, even the outer regions of our own district that would be outside the urban development strategy boundary or the urban development boundaries, and also on the Waimakariri side as well. We have worked very hard to collaborate and operate as a triumvirate through the urban development strategy and now the future development strategy in our space. We have met all of the requirements of the National Policy Statement, but if this is the promise of things to come, then it reinforces my concerns, and those concerns remain greenfields development, urban sprawl, and actually creating some of the problems that we can avoid by operating in a collaborative way. So I think the submission on Plan Change 64 is entirely appropriate, and I'll also continue to work collaboratively with Selwyn District Council on its proposed changes to the district plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yanni?
Thanks. Thank you. I think at least I need to acknowledge that we do have some reference to social and affordable housing, even though the actions are not specific. What we do know actually is that Selwyn and Waimak have the highest number of covenants in the country preventing social housing being built in new subdivisions. So when we think about the need for people to actually be able to stay in their community as they age or as their circumstances change, it's a pretty sad indictment that two of our neighbours have the worst way have excluded social housing from being built in these new developments. So I think as a city and as a region, we have to get a lot smarter at enabling social housing to be spread across equally around our region. So that's why I think things like inclusionary zoning are so important, because we've heard through this process that we can't actually address the covenant issue, that it's not part of a Resource Management Act process. So the only other way to do it is to look at the inclusionary zoning. And what I understand from Queenstown is the argument goes that when people make money off the very valuable increase they get from rezoning rural to residential or commercial or industrial, they make a lot of profit off that. So isn't it fair that they give something back to the community to recognise the community impact that that new development will have? So, I think we need to keep pursuing this. We'll wait and see what those recommendations are. It is really urgent. It's unfortunately overdue already. It was overdue since 2007. So let's keep the pressure on and try and get some real change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any more debate? Right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. You want that recorded? No. Thank you, Aaron. Right, now we're moving on to number 10. Plan change 3. The Christchurch District Plan final approval. Now this, okay, Yanni's happy to move it. Pauline's happy to second it. Any debate? No debate? All those in favour? Who had debate?
Do you have a question now? No?
All those against? None. Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. Have the rest of the day off. Thank you. We've got a closed meeting yet. Yes. Yeah, Jimmy's the Karakia. Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you, Jimmy.